This recording is protected by copyright. No part may be reproduced without the prior permission of the University of South Australia.
Up next we have Dr. Tim Sherratt, who, for anyone who's attending a History in the Digital World conference session, I'm sure he actually needs no introduction. But Tim is the manager of Trove at the National Library of Australia, and he's going to talk to us about some things, what's new in Trove. And he also tells me that he may have a few I Heart Trove badges for some Trove tragics here. So he tweeted that before he got on the plane last night to come to Adelaide. So if you're a tragic, perhaps come up and see him after. Thank you, Tim.
Obviously, I'm going to talk about Trove today. And, if we're going to talk about Trove, we obviously always have to start by trying to dazzle you with some huge statistics. And today's no different. So, Trove contains more than 360 million resources, including more than 110 million newspaper articles. We get about 70,000 unique visits per day. We have 100,000 registered users who have added 2 million tags to items within Trove, and they have between them corrected more than 100 million lines of newspaper text. Yeah, they're all a bit too big to really be very comprehensible, aren't they? So what I want to try and do today is to bring some of these numbers down to a sort of a local scale, a human scale, to see beyond the numbers and try to explore Trove as a platform for making meanings. Okay, first of all, Trove. Trove is a discovery interface, right? It helps you find stuff. But obviously, we're not trying to compete with Google. And indeed, most of our traffic comes through Google. Our aim really is to work with other organisations to try and bring content by Australians, about Australia, or of interest to Australians to the surface, to make it easier to find and to use. And to achieve this, we aggregate metadata about collections, information about collections. We collaborate with all sorts of organisations to find a way of harvesting the information that they have online and bring it into our databases. And we're not just talking about libraries, but museums, archives, research projects, research agencies of different types, universities, historical societies, local councils. You know, if you have collection material online and you would like to have it in Trove, talk to us and we'll see if we can do it. And that goes from the small. This is the bigger Pioneers Museum, which currently has 47 items in Trove, through to the large. For an example, the National Museum of Australia, which has about 60,000 collection items currently available through Trove. So there's a real range there. And while a large amount of our resources are books and journals, the journal articles, which reflects Trove's bibliographic roots, most of our collecting effort goes into the unique Australian material. That's the stuff that gets us really excited, and it's the stuff that we really want to try and help make as accessible as possible. That's our job. I'll admit that aggregation in itself doesn't seem particularly exciting. We've been doing this sort of stuff for many years. Generations upon generations of portals have come and have gone. But what does get me excited are some of the things that aggregation makes possible, or easier. Possibilities which, go beyond the search box, or beyond simple discovery. Now, I am sure that you will have no trouble at all whatsoever guessing the most heavily used part of Trove. The newspapers, indeed. The homepage of the newspaper site gets more hits than the National Library's homepage, by the way. And the digitised newspapers, the whole project is another collaborative effort between the National Library of Australia and the various state and territory libraries. And increasingly also too, local and regional organisations who are raising funds to aid the digitisation of their own local titles. So it is a big collaborative effort. The digitised newspapers are also a really good example of the power of scale. I mean, technologies like OCR, full text indexing, and of course the humble keyword search are not very exciting on their own. But apply them to 110 million newspaper articles across 150 years of Australian history, and, you know, wham, I mean, something really different happens then. And I'm sure many of you here today would have a story about how access to the digitised newspapers filled a crucial gap in your research, or alerted you to some subtleties or complexities which you weren't aware of before, or actually led you off in a totally different direction. I see lots of nodding heads as I say that. You know, this new form of access really enables us to reroute our inquiries around, you know, what we had before in terms of the printed indexes or the politics of received memory, without having to, you know, chain ourselves to a microfilm reader for several years and destroy our eyesight in the process. That's why I've got glasses. But with the power of keyword searching also comes some new challenges. You know, we have to be prepared to ask questions about what we are searching and why. I mean, what's actually in the Trove newspaper database? Do you know? Do you care? This is a picture from last week. This represents the number of newspaper articles per state over time. So the black line at the top is New South Wales, from 1803 through to 1990, something like that. So what does that mean? What does that represent? Does it mean that there's just more newspapers published in New South Wales? Well, there probably were more newspapers published in New South Wales, but the reason why that peak looks like that is because New South Wales has been investing a lot of money in digitisation of newspapers over the last few years. Why is this really weird peak in Victoria here? The competitive instinct, yes. It's because there has been targeted investment in the World War I period. So, you know, this starts to raise some interesting questions. I mean, how do digitisation priorities and investments affect what you get back in your search results? And how then does that shape your possibilities for interpretation, for, you know, actually understanding your results? And what about things like the quality of the OCR? Did you notice that the Renmark Pioneer was recently added to Trove? I love it because the early editions are handwritten. But of course, when you put that through the OCR machine, the results are, you know, something less than stellar. So until somebody jumps in and actually corrects all this, or actually really transcribes it because there's not really much real content there to correct, the articles are going to be difficult to find. You know, the OCR quality affects their findability. Now, the overall accuracy of uncorrected OCR sits at around 80%. But this varies quite a lot by title, by date, and by issue. There's all sorts of variables involved there. And while our text correctors have done an absolutely amazing job, like I said, 110 million lines of text corrected, much of their work has been focused particularly around the sort of family notices, you know, reflecting their value in genealogical research. The vast majority of what we would call news articles have no corrections at all. So again, how does that shape the results that you get back? What does it all mean? Well, it means that the database itself, its development, its assumptions, its operation, its content is not immune itself to the workings of history. There's no perfect, unqualified means of access. Beyond the huge numbers and the overwhelming possibilities are specific events, variables that are local, particular and contingent. There are stories to be told about the newspapers themselves and how they actually come to be sitting in our web browser. I'm going to show you another graph. Okay, This is a scatter plot graph which shows the number of words in news articles, articles which are categorised as news articles, on the front pages of Australian newspapers from 1803 through to 1954. This tells a story about the changing nature of the front page. Or more specifically, it tells a story about how the news came to the front page. Because, of course, for a long time, ads were on the front pages of newspapers. What's happening here? What's the story? Well, okay, remember I said number of words in news articles. As we go here through the 19th century, we see them all clustered around the 0 line. So there was no news on the front page. As we get into the 20th century, we see this starting to move up until we get this nice cluster here, representing that by this time, most newspapers had the news on the front page. That's the big picture. But underneath this, of course, are all sorts of complexities, played out across hundreds of separate newspaper titles. And here's just one, the Adelaide Advertiser. This purple line here is the number of words in ads on the front page, and the blue line is the number of words in newspaper articles. And we see there was quite an abrupt change. So it went from having basically a front page, all of ads, to a front page of news, just like that. Some newspapers weren't quite so dramatic in their changeover. And we can drill down further and actually get down to the actual day that it changed. So here we are on Saturday the 14th of February, front page full of ads. 100% of the words on the front page are in advertising. Next day, it's all different. The news. 96% of the words on the front page are in newspaper articles. This site, by the way, is public. You can go and explore any newspaper title and see when this change takes place. Do the same sort of analysis, drilling down. So, on one particular day, it all comes down to one particular day, one particular event, one particular change, the newspaper turned itself inside out. So, as I said, there are stories to be told, even about the structure of the newspapers themselves, and how they changed, and how that then changes the way we use and query them. Now, interpreting the newspaper corpus is pretty challenging, but you know, the nature of the aggregation itself, bringing all this stuff together, actually gives us an opportunity to start to play around with scale, to twiddle the knobs, to zoom in and out, to look for large-scale patterns, and then dig right down to a particular day, in a particular newspaper, in a particular place. And that's what I really like about another little tool I built called QueryPick. QueryPick helps you look for patterns or changes across time in your newspaper search results. So instead of getting just a list of 100,000 matching results when you type in your query and you're having to work your way through them, you put the same query into QueryPick and you get a graph which shows the number of matching results in each year. So I was watching the tweet stream from here the other day, saw somebody was talking about City of Churches when the City of Churches was first used in regards to Adelaide, so of course I just chucked it into QueryPick. So this graph shows you the number of articles matching the query, Adelaide and City of Churches over time. You can actually build up quite complex comparisons and searches using QueryPick. You can put more than one graph on, so you can actually sort of look at different changes. This is one I was just playing with last night, which is looking at the occurrence of the word German in newspaper articles and comparing, in this case, the blue line being South Australian newspapers and the red line being New South Wales newspapers. Okay, so then again, it's a big picture, but what you can also do using QueryPick, and I'll just swap out, is you can actually start to drill down. So if you mouse over any point on this graph, you see the number of matching results. If you click, it will head off to Trove and pull back the first 20 matching results. So you can actually drill down at any point and see what's sort of hiding there underneath that graph and get it actually drill down and sort of understand in some detail the changes that are taking place. Okay, so as QueryPick I think demonstrates, the scale of aggregated content, what happens when we bring all this stuff together, offers both interpretive challenges, but also the opportunity to shift perspectives, to move from big pictures down to the small stories. And that I find very exciting. Now, Trove is often used as an example of a successful crowdsourcing project. And certainly, as I've already said, the numbers are astonishing. 110 million lines of text corrected, with the top text corrector personally responsible for more than 2 million corrections. Academics are now exploring the motivations of people involved in Trove's text correction, weighing up the issues of altruism and self-interest, reward and recognition. And we're obviously very interested in this sort of research from a number of perspectives, and particularly as, interestingly, the rate of correction seems to be sort of flattening out at the moment. But I also wonder about the context of each of these individual acts of enrichment and engagement, of the meanings that are gained and given in each of these interactions. It's clear that Trove has changed lives, and I don't say that lightly. It's people tell that to us in terms of how they actually interact with things on their daily life, the use they make of Trove. But even those who aren't paid up members of the Trove army can make connections. Text correction, as you probably know, is not the only way that people can enrich or engage with the content on Trove. There are, for example, things like tags and comments, which people can add. And they do. As I said before, more than 2 million tags have been added to resources in Trove. They can also create lists. Lists are less used, but there's a significant body of material being created in lists. As you might expect from the name, they're basically just collections of resources. People bring together their research on a particular topic and save it and share it using a list. So they're really a quite convenient way for people for bringing together their research. And they do use them. I did a little bit of analysis the other day. These figures are already out of date, of course. Out of date almost as soon as I generated them. There are currently 27,911 lists created by 5,796 users, containing almost 500,000 items. And that's newspaper articles, books, published articles, all the sort of stuff which is on Trove. Now, unlike something like text corrections, the lists themselves contain plenty of contextual clues which enable us to sort of explore their use and meaning. We can examine their titles, their descriptive notes that people add to them, and of course their contents. So, I took those 27,911 public lists, grabbed all the titles from them, and did a quick word frequency visualization using the online tool Voyant. Now, given what we know about the interests of Trove users already, the dominance of the word family is not terribly surprising. Though it does give, quite a nice, clear sort of picture about how the lists are being used. What's more tantalising are things like down here. Which you probably can't see, it is the word mowers. Yes, there are indeed 107 lists about lawnmowers on Trove, created by one user. And that to me is just wonderful. I love it. I love to be surprised by the passions of our users. But let's get a bit more specific. Instead of just looking at everything, all the lists, I decided to focus on lists that included South Australia in the title. And we find we get a more sort of manageable 109 lists created by 42 users, but which still contain, a quite large amount of items, over 4,500 items. And I can actually sort of break that down a bit more. Of those 4,500 items, 64 works, so that's books or published articles, 4,500 news articles and 21 websites. You can actually add external websites to your Trove lists as well as the material in Trove, which is quite convenient. Oh. Okay. Okay, so again, I did a sort of quick word frequency analysis. Billiards, whales, earthquakes, oysters, archery, motoring. In this case, I should explain that the word titles here are not coming from the titles of the lists themselves, but the titles of the resources. So the newspaper articles, the books, the journals. So it's actually pulling it from the content itself. And it really, again, gives you quite a fascinating picture that about the sorts of questions that lead people to Trove. Now, I should explain that I'm not using any special Trove manager powers to undertake these analyses. All this data is public and it's accessible in a machine-readable form via the Trove API, and I'll quickly talk about the Trove API in a sec. Anyone can start to play around with this user-generated content, and if you want, I'll make available the scripts that I use to pull this data and to work with it. And what this means is that as well as being a platform for the discovery of Australian resources, Trove is also a platform for exploring the connections, the meanings that people find within, between and around those resources. In a way, it is in itself a living laboratory. Okay. Now, for all its impressive statistics, Trove is still just one little corner of the web. And that phrase "of the web" is an important one because packed inside it are a series of standards, expectations and philosophies. The days of standalone databases, of walled gardens, of silos are going, if not gone, hopefully. We expect our links to go somewhere. We expect resources to be connected. We expect to be able to share, reuse and annotate, not just in the spaces controlled by cultural heritage organisations, but in our own social realms. A lovely example of this is Trove Tuesday. It's a weekly event which has been developed without any sort of official support. It's simply powered by the enthusiasm of users who every Tuesday share stories about their latest discoveries in Trove. It's fabulous. And tools like Pinterest or Storify show that we have a real passion to collect across the whole web. And so while Trove's lists provide a sort of convenient way of starting to do that, we've got to go a lot further. It's only the beginning. We've got to be able to support this process of discovery, of enrichment and meaning making wherever it happens. We have to find better and smarter ways of linking cultural heritage resources to the interpretations, the narratives, the arguments that they support. Every footnote should be a portal. Every article should be a collection interface. And one way we can start to build these sorts of frameworks is through the API. Trove API is just a way for one computer program to talk to another computer program in a language that they both understand. Delivering the data from Trove in a nice, simple way that even a machine can understand without all the fancy bits that humans like. My analysis of front pages was built using the Trove API. Every time you put a query into QueryPick, it uses the Trove API. Instead of expecting you to come to a particular website at a particular address, the API puts the data where you are. It gives you the tools to create your own interfaces, your own tools, your own ways of displaying and using the data. And just a couple of quick examples. Trove Mosaic by Mitchell Whitelaw, which is a completely new discovery interface focused on images within Trove. And this is what you get if you type Adelaide in the keywords at the top of it. Pick Story, an iPhone app developed in the space of a weekend at the recent GovHack competition. It pulls images from the State Library of Western Australia's collection via the Twitter API and then exposes them in a way which encourages you to think about the changing meanings of place. And there's another one coming too soon, created during GovHack, called Ad Vintage, which pulls advertisements from Trove newspapers and uses it as a way of exploring social history. Whoops. Yeah. Now, the library writer and thinker Lorcan Dempsey turned the phrase "discovery happens elsewhere" to raise the horizons of cultural heritage institutions beyond their own carefully managed discovery interfaces. But it's really clear that meaning making also happens elsewhere, and we have to find better ways of supporting it. Europeana, which is sort of like a European Trove, which aggregates content from across Europe, talks about their API putting collections in your workflow. What about in your life? Instead of the sort of awe-inspiring statistics, I want Trove success to be measured by the small, the local, the individual acts of meaning making, wherever they might happen. I want Trove to help us find new, exciting and challenging ways of bringing our pasts into conversation with our present. And I'll leave you to explore Trove Newsbot if you want to have a conversation with Trove. Thanks.